say a few words. Hello again. This is Elisabeth von Leliwa. I had asked Elisabeth maybe a month and a half ago to give a talk about crisis. This was a month and a half ago. And of course the crisis that we were thinking about at that point was Corona. And the effects of COVID on the artist community, which are still playing out, and COVID is still very much a reality for artists and their livelihoods, and it's as we see from our masks, first of all, and also from the effects on the artist community, it's nowhere near ended. But of course, in the last weeks, crisis has taken on a new urgency and a new meaning. So Elisabeth very kindly shifted focus, and I am excited to hear what the result of that is.
Is it not to translate?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Give the introduction.
Что мы хотели бы поговорить сегодня о кризисе, который был у нас в мире, связанный с пандемией сначала, и потом, который, к сожалению, вышел на новый уровень, на новые масштабы, и мы хотели бы поговорить в деталях.
Yeah, thank you, Heather, for inviting me. Although I feel a bit like, what am I doing here at the moment, talking about crisis and things with people who have experienced, I think, more than a crisis, because yes, COVID is a crisis, of course, has been for many people, has been this disruption for many artists, musicians, performing artists especially, but I wouldn't call war a crisis. It's much more, it's an existential disruption, and so I'm very humbled to be here and talk in front of people also who have had this disruption.
Да, что наш мир наступило в наше время, в нашем мире корона, и уже очень много из-за этого пошло не так, как ожидалось, и очень сложно было двигаться, потому что никто не знал, в какое направление и как это будет все дальше развиваться. И сейчас, когда проблема приняла другую форму, и форму действительно экзистенциальную в этот раз, когда жизни стольких людей находятся в опасности, мы бы хотели об этом поговорить.
Okay. The title of the talk was Ich, Wir und die Krise, Myself, Ourselves and the Crisis. It's about the I, the person I am, but also about the group I belong to, and how can I react to a crisis. And the subtitles were a bit about the limitations, the limits of planning for the future, which in former times we did all the time, especially in the music business. You had plans for 4, 5, 6 years, for example, in a big concert hall or so, or a big theater. But we realize now, latest, that there are limitations and limits to planning for the future. So what does this mean? This is one question I want to ask.
Эта тема о том, я как человек, и я в социуме, я в группе, и как я и мы все вместе можем планировать наше будущее, потому что за последние годы очень сильно изменилось, и теперь стало гораздо сложнее иметь возможность видеть, что будет дальше, и планировать наше будущее тоже.
So that's the limits of planning. The second small topic I want to talk on is the potential of an open mindset, of what's going on in your mind. It might seem small, but I think it's always very, very important, the kind of mindset you have. You can change a lot with having different attitude or something.
То есть первое, мы хотели поговорить о том, как изменилась ситуация, как планировать будущее. И второе, это то, как наша позиция в этом всем и наверное, это можно перевести как mindset тоже по-русски, потому что это интернациональное такое слово. И
I'll explain more. So, good. And yes, it's about the I, myself, and the group, the collective. And then I thought, especially after the COVID crisis, it's, I think, very important to think about the possibility of a collective change in the music or artistical scene. Because I think when what the last 2 years have certainly shown is that being a single person, individual, there is only so much you can do. But a collective or a group can reach many more goals. So that's the third topic.
The third.
Yeah, this is the third idea, and then I will explain a bit more.
Да, что третья тема это как я, как индивидуум, существующий в социуме, существующий в группе, как это влияет на мое развитие, если мы двигаемся все вместе.
So perhaps I should introduce myself a little bit. I'm Elisabeth, and usually I do these sort of coaching topics for Heather, career development and things like that. Might sound weird at the moment in this sort of situation we are in, but I mean, if you're artists, if you're musicians, there are still careers you have and careers you want to develop. So that's the field I'm working as a coach and consultant. And in a former life, 10 years ago, until 10 years ago, I was working for a big concert hall, not very far from here, the Düsseldorf Tonhalle, doing programming, organization, was in a sort of artistic management for quite a while. And for 10 years now I'm freelancing. So basically all I'm telling you now is something I have experienced myself and I found it useful.
Это Элизабет, центр ее работы, она занимается коучингом и развитием карьеры, то есть консультирует музыкантов, артистов разных специальностей, как развиваться дальше в своей карьере. Раньше, 10 лет назад, она работала в Düsseldorf в Tonhalle, в отделе по менеджменту, и сейчас она продолжает свое дело в коучинге и готова открыто помочь всем, кто желает.
Thank you. Good. My first topic, the limitations of planning for the future. What do we usually do? We set ourselves goals, I think, for the future, what we want to achieve, what we are reaching, what we want to reach. We have visions, dreams. Yes, that's something that's in our inside. And also in management, goals are very important. And sometimes there, and in English I think there's another word, it's target. Very military word, I think. It's a military word, it's a target. A target you have to reach. You have to sell, so and so many contracts or whatever a day. But also as an artistic person or an everyday person, you will have goals you want to achieve, perhaps in your studies or with your work or whatever. So that is something we usually do, I think, instinctively. We set ourselves goals.
Первая тема – это цели, ставить цели и как мы к этим целям идем. И в самом начале каждого проекта, понятное дело, что первое, что мы делаем, это мы представляем, появляется идея, и с этой идеей появляются потом как шажки, которыми мы идем к нашей цели. Или, вот хорошее слово, тоже интересное слово, выбрала Элизабет, мишень, что мы к этому, что мы ставим нашу цель, и потом мы к ней идем.
So I don't want to talk about enforcement or self-optimization or how all these things are called, or control. You can use targets and goals to control people. But what a goal should do is it should give you strength, motivation, empowerment. And perhaps in a situation in which some of you are now, it's perhaps very weird to talk about that. You think, oh God, I can't do anything. I've just been cut off from everything. What can I do? Or many musicians in the last few years, 2 years, who couldn't perform, or perhaps students who have been seeing their teachers in this box, Zoom, and with disruption from the Wi-Fi and everything. So you don't feel very empowered, I think. You feel powerless. So, what do we do?
Ставя цели и имея мечты, идеи о будущем, это ощущение, оно нам придает силу, мотивацию и вдохновляет двигаться дальше. Но когда в жизни происходят некоторые ситуации, как, например, сейчас война, или 2 года назад началась пандемия короны, когда не было возможности нормально жить и нормально вести свои будни, то, конечно же, тогда ставить цели, наверное, меняет ощущение и становится скорее волнующим и неприятным. Вот. И как для многих из нас, наверное, это сейчас тоже случай, что мы себя чувствуем не совсем уверенными, не совсем сильными. И поэтому что мы можем с этим делать?
But I still think that working with goals is always quite a strong method, something you can do, and there's a trick, a nice trick about it, which you usually use in coaching, this trick, that you always set yourself goals which are within your own responsibility and which you can reach with your own strength. So they might seem small to other people, but they can be a big step for yourself. Maybe for some people with a big depression, getting up in the morning can be a really huge step. So I think it's very important to think of a goal always as that's my goal, and what can I do with my own strength in my situation now? And that's something you can always think. And a goal must not be huge or something. It can be very small. And it's possible in every situation, I think. And it also, of course, it needs a lot of, well, self-analysis or self-awareness. But I think that's anyway necessary for every artist, always to have a good look at yourself and to think, what can I do? What's the next step or so? So I think that's it's a method or tool you have already within you and can always use.
Ставя цели, в коучинге есть интересная техника, где человек, ставя и представляя цель, он думает о том, что находится в зоне его досягаемости. То есть, что я могу сделать сейчас, что я могу сделать сегодня, что реально. И таким образом, таким подходом появляется ощущение, что я могу что-то сделать, и я это делаю. И тогда это приятно.
And of course, if we think again of the topic, ich und wir, as always, only so much an individual can do. But we can see a lot everywhere in the world where people unite in a group and they find common goals and find them together. They can really change outward exterior situations even. As an individual, it's very difficult to change politics. But if I have a group or a party of individuals with the same goal, I might start to change something. So to find people you agree with and perhaps share the goal, fellow artists, your ensemble, people you are finding perhaps here in the green room to share common goals, then you have more power and empowerment than being on your own. It's very simple truth, but I think it needs sometimes reminding.
Еще один хороший способ – это когда, ставя себе цель, выбирая себе цель, двигаться не в одиночку, а искать единомышленников. Для того, чтобы ощущение было, что мы не одни, и что что-то происходит, и мы движемся, и вот это ощущение, что мы не я один, поле воин, а мы вместе.
For COVID, I have quite a nice, I think a good example from Germany. There's something which is called Deutscher Kulturrat. Sounds frightening, but it's basically a lobby group for the arts. And this Kulturrat, from the day one of the COVID lockdowns, was crying for money. Every day, daily newsletter, knocking at doors in the government, at the Staatssekretär für Kultur, etc. So in the end, they reached a lot. We got a cultural budget now that was higher than ever. We got subsidies for artists, And good news here in North Rhine-Westphalia, especially good program for artists during the COVID crisis. And that was because something like this Kulturrat, this sort of German cultural council, just was loud.
В Германии есть такая организация, называется Deutsche Kulturrat.
Rat, it's like council.
И она занимается поддержкой артистов в Германии. И во время короны, естественно, как и очень многие системы, был кризис у них тоже. И как они выбрались из этой ситуации, как у них получилось получить обратно деньги и ресурсы для того, чтобы делать работу, это что они были очень громкие. То есть они в своем желании хотели действительно его показать и выразить, и получить то, что нужно.
Yeah, so it's worth trying. Yes. So to finish this topic, this sort of planning for the future, yes, you can still do it. You can do it for the things and the goals you feel you can control, that you can reach them within your own strength. And the things you can't control, you can, for coaching, for all these things, you leave them aside at the moment. You can have a look at them later if they hinder you. But for a first step, it's always good to see what can I do, what can I change, what can I control, where are my responsibilities, and not care about anything else at the moment. And the same, like we as a group can do, can change, can control. And on this we will concentrate for the moment. So, and this way I think you can develop many small but valuable steps to get a change in your situation or maybe in the overall situations. I'm a very big advocate for small steps.
Да, и то, что мы делаем, мы можем начать это действительно с маленьких шажков, для того, чтобы было ощущение, что процесс идет, что мы движемся. И не стоит недооценивать тоже силу этих маленьких, но очень важных шагов, которые мы делаем в самом начале любого проекта.
Okay, so much about limits of future planning, and limits might also be protective for us and safe for us, but it's not very motivating to talk about limits usually. So on to the next topic, and this is the mindset, the open mindset, and I seem to understand that there's not really a Russian word for it perhaps, but there are many other words. So what is or maybe? Yeah, there are many other words. It can be like attitude, it's a bit like attitude, Haltung, intention, my intentions, my values, also my goals, the way I react, moods, emotions, everything. It's how this thing in there works.
Intentional way of thinking?
Intentional way of thinking, yes. Intentional way of thinking, yeah. It's a lot about intentions, actually.
Да, то есть то, как я себя чувствую, как я себя сам позиционирую, и вот mindset, как я себя настраиваю. То есть настройка, то есть сама настройка.
And also this can be very small. If somebody is unfriendly, unkind to you, you have lots of different possibilities of mindsets. You can be unfriendly, unkind too. You can be outright aggressive, or you can decide to ignore this person, or you can decide to ignore and suffer a lot for yourself, or you can decide to work out some strategy. So that is mindset.
Да, то есть в каждой ситуации мы выбираем, какая у нас позиция, как мы реагируем на ситуацию. То есть если к нам относятся как-то не так, как мы хотели бы, мы можем среагировать точно так же, можем обидеться, можем расстроиться, можем уйти в какое-то состояние, но то, что самое главное, чтобы я себя внутри себя хорошо чувствовала. И поэтому вот самонастройка. Как мы относимся к жизни и к жизненным ситуациям.
And this can always be your own decision, obviously. Even in very bad situations, you can decide on your attitude. perhaps you can't react on the outside, but you might be able. It's very difficult, of course, but this is something basically that nobody can steal from you, that you can develop an attitude or an intention to the things that are happening to you. The very bad things or the very good things as well.
То есть никто не вправе у нас забрать право чувствовать себя хорошо, и никто не может нам сказать, как реагировать на себя. То есть мы сами можем для себя выбирать, какое у меня ощущение может быть, и как бы я себя хотела чувствовать в той или иной ситуации, независимо от какая это ситуация. То есть плохая или хорошая, моя позиция, что я могу с этим сделать, как я могу это развить.
But it's still a very difficult task, lifelong task for every person on this planet, obviously, to work on this, to realize how I'm reacting, what's going on in my mind. Am I okay with what's going on in my mind? Do I want to change it? And that's actually one of the big topics or fields in which coaching is working. The field of the goal setting, and also the topic of mindsets. Huh? It's not therapy. Therapy is something else that's working on the mind and the psyche as well. But with coaching, you try to be active in your own mind, in your own decisions, however small they might be.
Да, это вот два центральных пункта в коучинге, то есть как я ставлю цели и как я сам себя настраиваю в этом всем процессе.
And I think especially for artists, it's very important to have this sort of open mindset, not to go into a concert or a theater performance and say, oh, I know what music is. Does this sound like music? No, I don't think so. Okay. Or theater, Verdi should be done like this, Wagner should be played like this, this stage production is not art anymore, or whatever. So this openness is something artists need anyway. And that's also good news for you, because it means that you have tools. If you've set your goals and everything, you have prepared with your goals, you have your plans, but you always keep this open mindset, because all the things you cannot plan are unexpected. And for that, it's good just to keep your antennas wide open.
И открытая позиция к миру, к тому, что происходит с нами, к разным мероприятиям, это то, что тоже очень важно для того, чтобы иметь гармоничную жизнь. И особенно для нас, артистов, потому что когда мы приходим на какое-то мероприятие и уже изначально с какой-то такой установкой, которая уже немножко, то есть отталкивает, а не принимает, то это нас самих ограничивает и наш опыт ограничивает, потому что тогда мы начинаем критиковать, и это очень, не очень продуктивно. И да, то есть вот в коучинге вот эти вот два самых главных пункта — это открытость и цель.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I've been talking a lot about the I, single person. So what could this all mean for a group, for collective, like-minded artists, persons, people? I think, and that is the idea that came also from the COVID crisis, that I think we need much more these sort of communities of practice and sort of finding together as artists, because I deeply believe that shared ideas multiply.
Да, мы ищем сейчас возможность действительно организоваться, объединиться, потому что идеи, когда их много, то в них очень много потенциала.
And sometimes when you're studying also, young artists, young pianists or so, you're going to competitions and everything is very competitive and the others are the rivals and so on. Yes, maybe in a competition, but it could also be a good idea to make good friends with other very good artists at a competition. Might be a much better idea than to be nasty. And on the other hand, we are now, when we are experiencing on different levels the sort of crisis and the disruption, I think we all feel there's a sort of rivalry, and I keep my knowledge and what my competencies or whatever, my strengths to myself. It simply doesn't work.
то есть тоже, когда вот, например, в ситуациях конкурса, когда мы приезжаем и видим, испытываем напряжение и много конкурсантов, много конкурентов, у нас может быть установка, что мы воспринимаем всех как врагов, или у нас может быть установка, что мы приехали на мероприятие, где есть возможность обогатить свою жизнь, познакомиться, может быть, что-то новое узнать. И вот именно эта установка — это то, что очень в ключевом режиме находится.
And I don't know exactly about Heather's plans, but I think these thoughts I've told you now, I think these could also be possible impulses for workshops or for advice this green room could be giving you. So perhaps the last few remarks that might be interesting for you also about the music scene in Germany, as it is now after 2 years of COVID, but has been before that as well. So a bit about the music scene in Germany that might be interesting for everyone.
И сейчас немножко о музыкальной сцене Германии.
Yeah. Perhaps something which is until now a division, I think, in the music and the theatre scene and so on, is actually the division between the what we call freie Szene, the freelance scene, and the institutions. And COVID has shown the enormous gap between these two cultural scenes. The freie Szene, so freie Musiker, die frei arbeiten, no? Oder zum Beispiel im Vergleich zu jemandem, der im Orchester angestellt ist. No?
То есть сейчас вот есть очень большое разделение между устроенных музыкантов, так сказать, то есть которые работают, например, на официальных местах в оркестрах, и те, которые вот фрилансеры, которые свободно работают.
Yeah, and for example, during COVID, for the people who are salaried or steadily occupied in an orchestra, opera house, I mean, the situation was not nice. No, they couldn't play, but the money came in. But for the freelancers, it was quite a catastrophe, and thanks to the government, they could be a bit averted. But that's a big division, actually, in the cultural sector.
То есть, например, как вот, например, сейчас в ситуации короны, когда работники оркестров не могли играть, не могли работать нормально, но при этом они продолжали получать свою зарплату, то есть была такая защищенность. На другой стороне, люди, которые свободно, то есть независимые артисты, они, к сожалению, попали, конечно же, в ужасную ситуацию, потому что не было никаких ресурсов, ничего.
Okay, perhaps some of you will beat me up for what I'm saying now, but very often I think the freie Szene, the freelance scene, is very often like a hotbed or an experimental space for new developments, for avant-garde, for unusual artistic programs, and yeah, perhaps this. Not true.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Okay. I said very often in the freelance scene, in the freie Szene, you find a sort of experimental groups, avant-garde groups, where artists really developed in a way. It can happen in a big opera house as well, but they have also other responsibilities. They play the big repertoire, the big canon of, for example, Mozart, Rossini, Verdi, etc. So that's also, let's say, like in the repertoire and in the artistic world, it's also can be a division.
Да, то есть это разделение, оно тоже относится и к объему, и к сложности репертуара, потому что, например, у некоторых представителей из свободных артистов он отличается от тех, которые работают в
And that's perhaps also special, perhaps a bit to Germany, because if I think perhaps of the United States or the UK, you will have this sort of the complete freelance or commercial theatres or groups. They will play a lot of mainstream repertoire, obviously, because they need a lot of audience. Bums on seats is called, I think. So, and here in Germany it's a bit different, because also the freelance scene, the freie Szene, gets money, public money. But very often, it's usually given as a temporary support for projects for 1 year or for 3 years now in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is already good.
Да, в Германии предоставляются поддержки, и есть организации, которые помогают свободным артистам, и особенно в последние несколько лет это очень улучшилось, и они получают достаточную помощь.
And that's something that might also opening up opportunities, because this project money, support money, financial aid is not for German passport holders, but it's for people who live in a city. The city of Cologne, the city of Düsseldorf, or so on. So if you have artistic projects, you can try and get money from the city. So this is also something that might be worth giving help and information about, I think, would be a topic for a bigger workshop, obviously. And obviously, as it is with project money, you never know what happens if you really get it, but there's a chance that you can apply for it, like the German artists or the artists already living in Cologne do, and try your luck. Perhaps a look into the future, actually. I dare. But it's actually, due to the COVID crisis, there's now also in cultural politics is quite a big discussion going on how this divide, this gap between the institutions, the great art institutions, and the huge freelance scene, how this gap can be, in a way, not closed, but bridged. Just last Friday, I was attended a talk with people from universities for performing arts, especially dance and acting, and from the ministry, students and so on, and there are let's say that, yes, goals. There are goals to bridge all these gaps between, let's say, academic institutions, the big theater institutions, and the people who are just out there making theater. So this is also a political thing, that this gap is going to be closed. That's, I think, an interesting thing, especially also for the German listeners here, artists, that somehow this sort of cultural politics in Germany are changing.
Да, что сейчас мы переживаем время, где наконец-то это пространство между людьми, которые работают в официальных местах, и свободными музыкантами и артистами, что это пространство становится все меньше и меньше. И очень много ведется работ и движений, шагов в эту сторону.
And this is now really sort of future music, but perhaps you have noticed that some of the big concert halls during COVID, they opened on some days their spaces, so people could apply, freelance musicians could apply and play programs there. And that has been well noted in some ministries as well. And so I think for the future there will be talks about cooperation formats between free groups and big theaters. The duties and values of institutions will be discussed. And I think in perhaps some years' time there will also be performance space and budgets for the freelance scene, also in the big institutions. I think this is the way it is going.
Yeah.
But that's not tomorrow or this year, but further on.
Да, что сейчас большие залы наконец-то начинают открывать свои двери для музыкантов, артистов свободных. И это развивается все больше и больше, и, судя по всему, это идет в очень хорошее направление.
Okay, so I'm at the end of my talk. Again, about this topic, I believe it's that we will sink or swim together. But you could think, okay, after COVID, after all that's happening, now it's all the horrible seas, COVID, climate change, I don't know whatever. No? The state will be using a lot of money on a lot of different things. So one could be afraid, oh, what will happen to culture? But you don't know. I mean, so far it has worked out. And I think that there might be in the future money problems, even in the so-called rich Western states. It's not a reason not to work together. because I think it's even more important to find collective solutions between the freelancers and the bigwigs, the Cologne Opera House or the Met or whatever. So it's important to find collective solutions to work together in the arts, because it's not like the car industry in Germany. It could be bigger, no? But it's not how do you say, der Umsatz, the money.
It's not the money maker.
It's not the money maker like the car industry in Germany or other industries. But there are many people working there. So I think because there are many people working in the cultural sector, in the arts, they cannot be ignored so easily, and that's the reason to work together.
Да, что в индустрии искусства очень много людей задействовано, и важно, чтобы мы все держались вместе, потому что будущее оно есть, будущее хорошее и светлое, и в это время такой нестабильности и неизвестности, что будет, это очень важно, чтобы мы держались вместе.
Yes, thank you. So these were just my ideas, but maybe they could give some impulses what could be done also in the context to do something for the Ukrainian artists arriving here, what could be done here in the Green Room. So thank you. And thank you for your translation once.